Chapter 4, Vows. Vows. Frithha watched the breeze stir the leaves outside the open window, stippling the pale green quilt with early morning light, the air fresh and cool enough to make any exposed skin bristle in pleasant protest, though the peace of it all was somewhat marred. Imoen on the opposite side of the bed, madly throwing things into her old leather pack. A knock on the door behind them, Jahara's stern tones quite audible through the wood.
Imoen, I will await you downstairs.
Yep, just a moment.
You really should have done this last night,
Frithha sighed, watching the girl hastily shove in tunics and trousers in a rainbow of colors.
You'll be pressed to make it there for the 25th as it is. Jahara wanted to leave days ago. Here, you know what Beth taught us.
She scolded, catching the girl's hand as a heavy silk dress nearly went the same way.
You must roll it so it doesn't get creased. I don't think that there will be any means for you to press it there.
Yeah, all right,
Imoen dismissed, already casting about her for something else as Frithha smoothed out the deep pink silk and carefully rolled it up.
Frithha, have you seen my, here they are.
Imoen appeared from under the bed, wielding 2 black slippers, puffing her hair from her eyes as she threw them in after the dress and paused to make one final check.
Right, perfume, jewelry, dress, shoes, and I think that is everything. Now, are you sure you aren't coming?
Imoen huffed, struggling to buckle the stuffed pack closed.
There's still time for you to pack if you rush, and I bet we could find you a dress and trade meet.
Frithha shook her head, smiling gently.
No, I am better here. I get tired too quickly to travel any distance.
The excuse was a poor one, but it was the easiest one to give, and they had all accepted it on that merit. Imoen sighed.
I suppose it will be strange without you there though, I don't even know her.
Frithha's smile broadened.
Nalia invited you, Imoen, she wants you to be there. You'll enjoy it, and I am sure Lord Corthala will have been in receipt of an invitation too.
She added slyly. Imoen laughed even as she flushed a pink to rival her hair.
You hid yourself away from the world, but you still managed to find the time to nose about in my affairs,
Frithha heaved a dramatic sigh.
As always, I must enjoy my romantic thrills vicariously.
Imoen smiled, something about her manner softening.
You be safe while we're gone, and maybe when I'm back we can have another talk about what we're going to do next.
Frithha dropped her face to the quilt beneath her, fingers moving to play with a stray thread that made up the intricate pattern of oak leaves that was embroidered upon it. They had talked of this a 10-day before, when, after days of Imoen's relentless questions about the style of dress she was having made, Frithha had finally told the others that she would not be attending Nalia's wedding with them. Imoen sank onto the cover beside her, Frithha forcing herself to meet the sincere green eyes.
I like it here, Frithha, I really do, but I want to get out and see the world, like we talked about when we were younger. Maybe we can just visit Athkatla at first.
She offered eagerly.
You can show me round, maybe we can even get little parts in your theater's new play. Oh, Frithha, after everything, it would be nice to just have some fun.
Frithha felt her heart ache. She knew she was being unfair, keeping them there as she hid from the world, and she had to remind herself that while she had been out traveling for good and ill, Imoen spent the same 4 months trapped on some desolate rock. Was she now to make Suldanesseller a similar prison?
Yes, all right,
Frithha sighed, glad to feel a warm determination creep in at her own words.
We can talk about it. Come on then, Jahara will be getting impatient, I'll walk you both down to the gates. Good grief!
She cried as she made to heave Imoen's bulging pack from the bed.
It's fortunate for you the elves lent you horses. Did you pack everything you own?
Imoen laughed.
Oh, give it here, it's not that, ow, Oh, I think I've just pulled my shoulder.
A gnome spent a moment brushing the creases from his formal, blue tunic before folding it into his wading pack, the room about him still painfully neat and little changed for the fact he had lived there at the order for almost a month. He had been glad to receive leave to attend the wedding. At the time, a part of him had wished he had perhaps asked the prelate instead, as he had stood under Sir Ryan's austere gaze waiting for the man to make his verdict. A gnome had met Valigar and Minsk earlier in the 10-day, unsurprisingly, both had received invitations to Nalya's as he had, and once his knight had agreed he could go, and a gnome had immediately collared a young squire to take a message over to the Korthala estate and arrange to meet the men at the gates, that they could travel out together, their three and those others of the order who had been invited, as well. It was all arranged now. They would leave early, just after the dawn, arriving at the keep by the afternoon, where they would camp the night with many of the other guests on the plain before Diarna's keep, ready for the ceremony the following day. A gnome glanced to the window where the setting sun had set the sky ablaze, pale coppery clouds drifting across the sky in wispy tendrils. He knew the others had been invited. Nalya had asked him via his invitation where she should forward theirs. They would have had to leave Suldanessellar days ago if they were planning to attend. Would Fritha be with them? He felt the hope squirm in his stomach even as his heart twisted with reluctance. Wonderful as it would be to see her, he was rather dreading it, too. It had been so pleasant those last few 10-day, without that constant gnawing worry, this reunion, and the idea of finding her just as broken as when he had left, merely a chance to stir up all that old misery. But what if she was better? Would he feel jealous that she had been healed without him, even by another's hand? He saw her behind his eyes, flushed and laughing as she used to be, and doubted he would even care as to the source. The bell for dinner broke him from his thoughts. The man tying closed his pack and setting it at the end of his bed, ready for the morrow. The courtyard was all but deserted, the square of stone buildings still radiating the day's heat even as the chill of the twilight drew in.
Ah, Sir Anomen, you go to dinner.
An Anomen turned to see Brianna, the woman striding across from the ladies' dormitory to meet him in the center of the yard, her green tunic bringing out the auburn in her hair.
Yes, my lady, will you walk in with me? Certainly,
she nodded, puffing a slight sigh as she admitted.
I am rather glad to be out of the dormitories. I share a room with 3 of the other ladies, and the only subject that can hold them this afternoon is this wedding. They speak little of the groom, but House Diarna seems to carry much influence here in Athkatla. It is so, my lady, and I suppose many are surprised to hear of this match. The Lady Diarna suffered somewhat after the recent death of her father.
Brianna frowned.
Yes, I have heard that madness claimed her, the lady refusing her previously arranged betrothal and taking to the adventurer's life for a time.
A gnome's defense was instant.
Indeed, though it was no madness which prompted the decision, but a desire to help others, and she was good ally to have. She traveled with you?
The woman exclaimed, glancing about the courtyard with a puzzled frown, as though wondering why the lady had been allowed to ride within the order's ranks.
Yes,
a gnome explained.
When I journeyed the land seeking to prove myself and earn my knighthood, I have only had honor of it since last autumn. I see. Then you, too, must be invited to share in the Lady Nalya's joy. I know that the ladies Irlina, Celia, and Genevieve are leaving with the dawn.
As were Squire Varon, Sir Dextes, and many more of Brianna's new friends within the order, the words had left a gnome's mouth before he even considered them.
Would you like to accompany me, my lady? As a friend, of course.
He added quickly,
I mean, my invitation included a guest and, well, I understand that many of your acquaintances will be attending.
Brianna was frowning again, thin lips pressed together as she clearly decided on her phrasing.
I should be glad to accept, but I worry it may put you in a compromising situation with your lady. Perhaps I speak out of turn.
She added at his, no doubt, surprised expression.
But Lady Irlina mentioned something the other day, which led me to believe you were courting a young woman of the adventuring persuasion. I believe she said her name was Fritha,
a gnomon supplied for her,
and we were, but, Forgive me,
said Brianna, briskly interrupting his discomfort.
I can see this subject troubles you, let us speak of it no more. As to your offer,
she continued, smiling once more,
I should like very much to attend with you, Sir Anomen. Anomen is sufficient, my lady.
Her smile broadened.
And you may call me, Brianna. Yes, well, we had best get on,
he prompted, realizing they were not a step closer to the refectory and the meal would likely be well served by now. He held the door open, gesturing for her to take the lead lest he be unable to keep the discomfort from his face. He was merely behaving courteously, indeed, how he would have treated any lady. But it suddenly felt terribly disloyal to the feelings he still held, and he did not wish for Brianna to get the wrong impression, or anyone else, Anomen considered sternly, noticing the heads turn at their entrance as they stepped into the low roar of the refectory, Simon already whispering furiously at Eric's ear. Jahara glanced to the girl at her side, Imoen's face pale in the twilight and bearing no trace of her previous tiredness as she surveyed the sprawling camp about her, the darkness dotted with small campfires. It had been a 7-day journey from Suldanesseller, a small company of elves kindly escorting them the 2 days to the river where they caught passage to trade meat, the pair leaving the town but a day ago and hitching a ride with a caravan to come the rest of the way to the keep. The castle itself was towering next to them, windows glowing a warm yellow over the dark plain before it where large pavilions had been pitched in anticipation of the arriving guests, smaller camps springing up around them as more people had arrived through the day, the atmosphere buzzing with a sense of anticipation as the different groups called to each other, the excited murmur of talk and laughter hanging over the field.
Over there,
cried Imoen suddenly, a hand thrown out to the tiny camp a few paces from them.
It's Anomen and Valigar and
the last name was lost to a squeal of delight as she nearly floored the Rashami in her exuberant embrace.
Minsk. I thought you would have left for Rashaman already. No, young Imoen,
the man rumbled, patting her head fondly as she at last let go.
We have been delayed in the city, but young Fritha is not with you.
Jahara shook her head, sinking into the place beside Anomen as the girl dropped to sit between the two rangers.
No, she decided to stay in the city. Yeah, she didn't want to slow us up on our journey. She is ill?
asked Anomen.
No, nothing like that,
Imoen assured him.
But she gets tired quite easily nowadays. Yeah, I know,
the girl added at his frown.
She didn't mention it to us for ages either. But she's doing a lot better now. She was laughing like Lyran over your letter, Val's. Letter?
Repeated Minsk, both he and the knight turning to Valigar with knowing smiles, the ranger himself seemingly too fixated on Imoen's words to notice.
You let Fritha read it. No,
the girl offered blithely.
I just read bits out when we were all out on a picnic with Solafane and the elves. You read it out.
Jahara rolled her eyes. By Sylvanus, the girl was a devil.
I think gave us the gist would be a more accurate description of the event,
she offered, adding sincerely.
I believe Fritha greatly appreciated the news of her theater.
Valigar just grunted, suddenly very focused on stoking the small fire, Imoen fighting against a wicked grin as she clapped her hands together briskly.
Anyway, what's been happening with you lot?
The men's tales of slavers and merchants took them well into the night, a no-man retiring to his own camp after a few hours while they just pitched their tent there next to the men's, the field slowly quietening about them as everyone finally found their beds. The next day dawned bright and sunny, most people sleeping in after the late night, and Jahara enjoyed a quiet breakfast with Valigar and Minsk, Imoen emerging from their tent just as the druid was contemplating changing into the formal tunic she had brought. For an instant, their small company had been frozen, Imoen there before them, her smile more uncertain than usual as she had smoothed out the heavy silk skirts of her deep fuchsia gown, a sash of vibrant orange about her waist, the color picked out by the anthers of the white silk lilies she had pinned into the simple twist of her chignon. A moment for the men and Jahara to change their tunics and, therefore gathered with the rest of the guests in the courtyard, a company of Tarite priests putting the finishing touches to the large wooden altar that had been set up in the center, and all waiting for the couple who had brought them together. They did not have to wait long. Lady Nalia d'Arnas was married at high sun on the 25th day of Tarsuk to cheers and great applause, the girl's freckled face beaming beneath the circlet of laurel leaves, Lundov looking similarly overjoyed under his verdant crown, the deep blue of her gown well matched to his fine blue doublet and complementing the gloriously clear sky above, the blue and gold griffin of her house banner flapping side by side with the stout scarlet wyvern of his own. The guests were milling about the courtyard now, waiting for dinner to be announced in the great hall, the newlyweds doing the usual tour of thanks and congratulations, Nalia looking exhausted but happy as she found them in the throng.
"Ah, Jahara and Imoen, too,"
she cried, sweeping one after the other into a warm embrace.
"I'm so glad you could make it, and is Fritha with you?"
she added, eyes scanning the crowds about them.
"Ah, no,"
admitted Jahara,
"she is well, but a little weak yet to make the journey."
A flicker of disappointment to her face, something of it lingering in her eyes even as the sunny smile returned.
"Well, perhaps that is for the best, our memories make us who we are, but sometimes it can be nice to forget." "Oh, and Anomen,"
the girl continued brightly, the knight appearing next to her, a tall dark-haired lady at his arm.
"It is good to see you again, and I do not believe we have met, my dear."
Anomen stepped in to make the customary introduction.
"Lady Nalia, may I present Lady Brianna, a fellow of the order." "I am pleased to know you,"
the woman demurred, green velvet skirts sighing as she bobbed her curtsy. Nalia beamed.
"You are most welcome, my dear." "Ah, and here's the lucky man himself,"
cried Imoen, her grin matching his own as Lundov arrived at his new wife's side.
"Congratulations, Lundov." "My thanks, my lady." "So, does this mean you are Lady Disifiso now?"
she teased Nalia, the lady hiding her smile in her sleeve as Lundov laughed loudly.
"Not likely, the Amnian tradition has it that the greater house keeps the name and they do not come greater than this one. I am still Disifiso, but my lady will retain the name d'Arnas, as will our line, and proud I am that they should bear it, too. Anyway, forgive me,"
he continued, turning to his bride with a smile.
"I came over to tell you Lady Delcia is seeking you, my love, before I was distracted." "Auntie is looking for me,"
Nalia repeated, a concerned frown creasing her brow.
"Perhaps something is wrong in the kitchens, I had better go and see. I will catch you all again later and we can have a proper talk,"
she promised, Lundov nodding his agreement before the pair disappeared off into the crowds, their way much slowed by the many guests stepping up to wish them well. Imoen immediately turned her attention to the two left, a hand thrust out at the tall woman at Anomen's side.
"Hello, I don't think we've met, have we? I'm Imoen." "Ah, hello," she answered, a glance to the man next to her betraying her discomfort. "As Anomen said, I am Brianna." "Nice to meet you there, Brianna. So, how long have you two known each other then?
Well, this past month. We met on the road from trade meet.
Really? That is interesting.
Hoa no men!
Came the shout behind them, the pair whirling to see a lanky, dark-haired youth waving to them from across the courtyard. A no-man turned back to them with a polite bow.
If you will excuse us a moment.
Imoen nodded airily, the smile souring as soon as their backs were turned.
Didn't take him long, did it?
Imoen!
Hissed Jahara.
What?
She cried, all innocence, the druid given no time to finish her scolding as Imoen's eyes caught on something behind her.
Oh, look, there's Valigar and Minsk, oi, Vals!
And she was gone, Jahara turning to watch her moving swiftly through the crowds towards the pair, pausing to take a wine cup from a servant as she passed, and Jahara hastened to catch her before she could cause any real trouble. Solafane ascended the 3 steps, finally escaping the afternoon's glare as he entered the deep shadows of the covered porch, days of familiarity not quite forestalling his knock, though he no longer waited for an answer, the parlor beyond dark, cool and quite empty.
Fritha! I'm through here,
came the call, the back door opened to the garden and he stepped out onto the back porch to find her knelt upon that long, lush lawn, her face pink and fingers mudded as she worked the weeds from one of the raised flower beds that ran along either side of the surrounding high fence. The breeze was stirring through the flowers, the bobbing heads of yellows, pinks and whites, a sea of color where bees dived and looped.
Solafane,
she greeted, a forearm shading her eyes as she turned to him.
You are here early, trying to get a reputation as a good student.
He smiled.
I fear my reasons are far more selfing, I must admit, to merely enjoying your company.
Fritha laughed gently.
Teacher's pet. Gods!
She sighed, dropping her arm to return to her work.
It's so warm today.
Here, he offered, shading his own eyes with a hand as he stepped down and placed his wide-brimmed hat upon her head, the girl brushing the stray curls from her face with a forearm.
My, you are getting brave.
He shrugged, already back in the shadows of the porch.
It is shaded here and my eyes grow stronger by the day.
She smiled and nodded at this news, and he settled down to his studies, listening to the gentle huffs and sighs of the girl at work, Fritha finishing her weeding of the beds to set to the task of dividing a large pot of bright green shoots into the spaces she had made. They had spent many days the same way since the women had left, a couple of times finding them walking out of the city, once with Lydril and his friends as they had taken them on a visit of the old temple ruins that had not long ago been overrun by his own people. But the rest of the time had found them there, at the back of her house, him absorbed in his studies of the local language and the world in which he now found himself, while she tended her garden or practiced her lute, sometimes even sewing or reading on the porch as he did, the pair sharing idle talk in the conde then that improved with every day.
That is better,
Fritha sighed eventually, washing her hands in the watering can next to her and drying them on the skirts of the loose yellow gown she wore, the girl rising to stretch out her back, her gaze drawn to the clear blue sky as she fanned herself idly with his hat.
I hope the weather is this fine further north. This is the day of your friends joining.
Solafane confirmed, the girl nodding as she passed by him on her way back into the house, her voice accompanied by the chime of cups.
Yes, I hope Imoen and Jahara made it in time, I'm sure they did,
she assured herself, appearing in the doorway with a tray bearing 2 cups and a pitcher of chilled tea she had clearly made a while back and left to cool in the pantry. She set it between them with a smile, settling in the corner opposite next to her lute case to pour their cups, handing him his along with his hat. He let his eyes drop to the jug between them, the long mint sprigs she had placed in the brew just breaking the surface, like the freshwater weeds that grew in towering forests from the deep beds of the lakes far below this land of light, fed by the volcanic fissures that ran beneath and nurtured by his people. He had watched the slaves sometimes, out on their wide flat-bottomed boats, harvesting the leaves of the upper canopy as delicacies for the table. He may never see such again.
Do you regret not joining them?
He asked, glad to distract himself from such brooding before it could take a proper hold.
Attending the wedding, you mean?
Said Fritha, slowly shaking her head.
Ah, no, I don't think it would have been for the best. You did not wish to see the others? In part.
A long pause. Fritha was an open girl. If you were able to approach her with a question she could not neatly sidestep. Solafane watched her sip thoughtfully at her tea.
Who is Nalia to you?
A smile graced the rim of her cup.
Ah, you have earthed out the root of it, haven't you? She was my friend from long ago, we travelled together a time before she returned to her lands. I was in love with her, I think, and I believe my feelings could have been returned, too, though it was hard to tell at the time how real it all was. There was a lot of affection in me back then, it needed an outlet. And you felt that your attendance to such a day may stir up too many memories for you both.
He nodded.
You were wise to avoid it then. I find the best course with such wounds is to just leave well alone. What is it?
He questioned at her ripple of laughter.
You've been practicing your conde then with Imoen, haven't you? You sounded just like her. You miss them?
He asked.
She and Jahara, I mean.
Fritha nodded, smoothing out her warm yellow skirts.
Yes. I know it did not seem so when I could go days without seeing them, but it was nice to know they were around. But, I can't expect them to hover about forever.
She glanced to him, suddenly grave.
Imoen was asking again about our plans before they left. She wants to go to Athkatla. And do you wish to return to Athkatla? You always know which questions to ask, don't you?
She sighed, smiling ruefully as she admitted,
not really, but this is not just about me, I have to consider her feelings as well. As long as you do not forget your own,
he reminded. She sent him a soft look.
Always watching out for me, aren't you? Of course,
he nodded, a slight smile creeping in.
I never had a sister. Sister?
She laughed, looking surprised by her own amusement.
You do mean that, don't you? It's just the last man who named me so had other intentions in mind. You speak of a nomen.
She laughed again, it sounded wistful.
That I do. Do you think of him often? I rather try not to. I think in both our best interests. I doubt he would agree.
She cocked her to the side as though deliberating the thing.
I think more of him does, than doesn't, he left, after all. And I do not blame him. Being with me has already killed him twice, only once more than the rest of them, I will admit, but still. Is that why you let him leave? Yes. It was not fair to ask him to stay, to give up the order, and I know he would have had I asked him. But what was between us is gone now, and even if something else could have grown to take its place, what sort of life can we share? No, we are better off apart, and this way he is free to find someone new. A nice, warm girl, like the one I used to be.
She shook her head to herself, turning to unpack the lute next to her, and he spent a moment or two listening as she watched the bees, carelessly plucking a high wavering tune with many sliding notes that seemed inspired by their dance.
So will you be leaving for Athkatla then?
he asked eventually. The girl shrugged, the last note she had played left to fade in the air.
I suppose of all the places Imoen could have wanted to travel, there would be the easiest for me, and I would like to see my theater again, perhaps it would not be so terrible. And may I accompany you? You would want to go to Athkatla?
She asked, seemingly surprised. It was his turn to shrug.
I would like to see more of the surface, though I understand my company could make matters more difficult for you.
She snorted faintly.
I doubt anyone there would care, as long as you've coin. Oh, I can see it now, we'll buy you fine clothes, I'll get you a part in the playhouse, make sure you are invited to all the right parties. Oh, the ladies will all be clamoring for you as guest of honor, the mysterious warrior who carries the riches of the Underdark with him. I'll make you toast of Athkatla in under a 10-day.
She proclaimed with a laugh. He joined her in a wry smile.
I had hoped I had left my acting in Ustnatha. Ah, I would I had.
She sighed, suddenly frowning as she admonished herself.
No, no, I should not say such things, I am more myself now than I have been in a long while, even before we left for the asylum. You wore such masks before you entered the Underdark.
She nodded.
Raising the coin for Imoen's rescue was a trial in itself, and as the leader, I felt I had to put on a brave face for the rest of them.
Her gaze shifted, eyes staring out across the sunlight garden.
I suppose that was why my change was such a shock for them.
There seemed little more to say after that, and he returned to his studies, the girl laying down her lute, likely worried she would disturb him, and producing a book of her own, and they stayed like that for the rest of the afternoon, the sun sinking slowly behind her garden. Fritha had been dozing for the last half hour, the book lain open in her lap while the light crept up the green decking, the sun low enough that the porch was gradually losing its shade, and Solafane was deliberating on waking her that they could retreat to the cool of the parlor when the decision was made for him. The knocking rattled through the house, Fritha awaking with a start and frowning as she rose to answer it, opening the front door to find a blond youth stood there in the pale blue livery of the palace servants. He bowed.
Lady Fritha, Her Majesty, Queen Elsaim, requests your presence at the palace. This very moment. If you can be spared, lady.
Solafane frowned, suspicious of this sudden summons.
And may I attend also?
The youth looked uncomfortable.
It was not mentioned. It will be fine, Solafane,
Fritha soothed with her usual mildness.
I will come now. I will await you here then,
he agreed, more for the messenger's benefit than for hers, and he stood on her porch, watching them move off down the walkway until they were lost to the glare. The messenger left her just inside the main doors, a couple of maids who recognized her from her stay there, gladly taking her the rest of the way through the airy, quiet corridors into the heart of the palace. Elsaim was waiting for her, the room they led her to, a large circular chamber that was half room, half garden, the pale wooden walls lined with large pots overflowing with flowers, a fountain playing in the corner, while above was open to the verdant canopy. It was very beautiful, but Fritha preferred her own garden. An ornate table of scrolling wood had been placed in the center, 2 chairs either side, and 2 glasses atop it, the queen turning from where she had been watching the fall of water to dismiss the 2 maids with a nod, a smile welcoming Fritha into the room.
Fritha, you came.
Fritha dipped her head in a bow.
As you requested.
Elsaim gestured to the chair opposite, the elf pouring the pale pink wine from the tall fluted jug between them, though neither woman touched their glasses as the meeting began.
So, you are enjoying your stay at the city?
The queen smiled.
I noticed you were not tempted away by this wedding.
Fritha had little patience left for such pointless pleasantries.
No, I was not, but was it truly talk of that which brings me here?
Elsyme sighed, perhaps she had wanted to build up to this moment, her eyes lingering on the table as she ventured.
Do you recall, Fritha, when you first rose in the great temple after 3 days of death? I said that the people of Suldanissellar would forever be indebted to you, and that there would always be a place for you here.
She paused, moving as though she would take a drink before she thought better of it, her slender hand clenched as she laid it next to her glass.
There are rumors coming from the south, of giants on the move in Tether and other clamorings of war. The borders are far away though, and we thought little of it, at first, but our scouts have since reported back that people are foraying into the southern edge of the Wealdeth, this great forest where Suldanissellar finds its home. It is believed they were looking for the ruins of a temple that was once located there, one that was destroyed 2 decades past now.
Elsyme swallowed dryly.
A temple dedicated to Baal. A group of soldiers leave tomorrow to investigate further and assess the threat to this city, and the Wealdeth at large. And you would like me to leave with them?
Confirmed Fritha evenly. The queen flushed.
Your actions saved this city. I gave you my word you would always have a place here, and I will not break it, but...
Elsyme trailed off and Fritha nodded, speaking the excuses she could not bear to offer.
You have your people to consider. If a Baal cult is emerging, then I am surely to be a target, and your people have suffered enough strife of late. I will go.
She sighed.
But there are terms. I want Solafane and the others to be allowed to stay here if they choose it. Imoen is not as well known as I, her presence would pose the city little threat. And when the others return, they are not to know where I have gone. You must tell I just left.
She pressed.
That I went to Kendal Keep or somewhere, and you do not know when I will return.
The queen nodded, finally able to meet her eye.
You have my word. May Corellin Larathian watch over you.
Fritha left Elsyme there and then, no desire to stay and make empty chatter with the woman, and she was halfway home when she stopped on the small platform that overlooked the marketplace. The tier below, the long benches that were set about the border interspersed with fine statues and flower beds, couples and small groups seated or promenading the edge, enjoying the peace. Fritha took a seat on the nearest bench, unmindful of the stairs as she lay back and closed her eyes against the golden sky. So the wheels were in motion already, and though she wished she could reason it all away with thoughts of coincidence and rumor, it did not feel that way, a dull weight heavy in her stomach ever since the queen had told her. She knew of the prophecy, the children were fated to drown Faerun in blood, and most of it their own, in that final step to Baal's return. It was just her part in it all of which she was uncertain. Should she go south with the elves? She knew she had just promised Elsyme as much, but she had the general impression the woman hardly cared as long as she was out of her city. Perhaps she could go north, back to Athkatla as Imoen had wanted, and meet the rest of them there. But a part of her felt like she was just putting off the inevitable, and she was tired of running, knowing her destiny was yet to be faced, her life and the ties that went with it all the more difficult to invest in when she was waiting for it to end. Perhaps it would be better to just walk willing forward and get it all over and done with. Fritha felt the breeze caress her hair, the inside of her eyelids burning red in the fading light. She wished she had someone to talk to, but the voice was gone, and even the one that had kept her company since her lonely childhood in Kendal Keep now felt forced and staged. She sighed. There was nothing to be done, and, in reality, she had made her decision when the queen had first told her. She would go south and meet her fate, and the others, well, would do what they willed, but she would not see them dragged along with her. The pale twilight was drawing in by the time she finally mustered the energy to return to her house. The parlor was empty. Solafane had likely grown tired of waiting and returned to his own rooms an age ago. Fritha gazed about the small room, kept tidy by the Drow's daily visits. At least it would make it easier to pack. But gods above, she felt wretched. And, for a moment, she was almost tempted to get drunk, just to take the edge from it. But she had learned her lesson with that long ago. However much you drank, there was always that inevitable moment where you were sober once more and you found all your original woes awaiting you, plus possibly a few more and a headache into the bargain. A moment stooped over the table, making a neat pile of the books and maps she would be taking with her, and she was marching up the stairs, her old pack fished out from under her bed and placed open upon it as she slowly emptied the wardrobe. A few trousers, a few tunics, some underwear, no dresses, they took up too much room and she never had chance to wear them anyway. Her jewelry? Oh, why not, it was small and at least she could sell it if she had to.
Fritha, forgive me, but you could not hear my calls downstairs. I thought you may be hungry, so I brought us.
And Cellophane stopped just a moment after she did, the girl frozen with a neatly rolled tunic halfway to her bag, the man's pale eyebrows knitted in a puzzled frown as he watched her from the open doorway.
Are you going somewhere?
She nodded slowly, her mind whirring through the possibilities. She had not expected to have to explain.
Yes, I've decided to take a walk out for a few days. I heard there are some temple ruins to the south and I would like to see them. You are going alone? No, with some elves.
A long pause. Fritha could feel her face growing hotter as his eyes bored into hers. For one who had been brought up to never question a female with such insolence, he had certainly taken well to it.
And may I attend with you?
Fritha faltered, finally defeated as she sank onto the bed with a sigh.
I used to be so good at this, really good, I could have convinced you the sky was green and fish flew about it had I been so inclined.
His smooth face wore a gentle look.
So the truth is, Elisim's kicking me out. I agreed to go peaceable if the rest of you were allowed to stay, so.
She gestured to the pack next to her. Cellophane was frowning again.
You are leaving without the others.
Fritha sighed deeply.
Yes, and I know they won't agree with me, but it really is for the best. I am destined for destruction, and I know for some unfathomable reason they all want to share it with me, but I don't. It won't be easy for them or me, and too many have died already trying to keep me from my destiny. I thought I had accepted it before, being a ballspawn, but I had not understood the consequences of it. All this trouble with Irenicus, him murdering my friends, stealing Imoen, and then our souls, at last showed me what my heritage could truly mean for me, and I was bitter, angry that life had dealt me such a hand. But good and bad comes to all people, and I understand now, have understood it ever since I stood beneath this great tree and thought on the death that awaited me at its heart. I have accepted what I am and the future I will likely have. I can do nothing else.
She looked up at him, trying to will him to understand it, too, as she asked,
when the others arrive back, please just tell them I've returned to Candlekeep for a visit. They will only follow me otherwise, and, selfish as it sounds, their presence will just make everything harder for me in the end.
Cellophane was still frowning, a determined cast to those fine, silvery eyes.
I do not want to stay here.
Fritha snorted, finally pushing the tunic into her bag and continuing her packing.
Well, you're free to leave whenever you choose. I mean, I wish to go with you. You don't know where I am going yet. I would not care. The Underdark.
The man could not suppress his gasp.
Sweet Illustrae, truly. No,
she laughed gently,
but I feel a bit better that you believed me. As for our destination, it was as I said before. Someone has been poking around looking for the ruins of a Baal temple on the southern edge of the Wealdeth, and a group of soldiers are being sent out to investigate.
She glanced to him again.
You still want to come? I do. You had best go and pack then,
she sighed, half guilty at the relief she felt. It would have been a harder journey without any ally.
We leave with the dawn.
Cellophane nodded, taking the sandals she now held and placing them in the bag for her, in an unprecedented display of boldness, his other hand hovering at her back as though to usher her from the bed she was still seated upon.
Indeed, but first we eat.
The great hall was a crush of people, the tables pushed back to make room for the many couples as the minstrels struck up the first brandsle of the evening, and the courtyard outside was little better. Guests gathered beneath the paper lanterns that had been strung across the battlements, talking and drinking under a star-scattered sky. Valigar kept his eyes fixed on the pink twist of hair, trying his best to keep up without spilling his drink as the shorter girl weaved easily through the throng.
Come on, this way.
She was heading for the steps in the corner, the girl tripping lightly up them, and at last they were above the warm press, the air cool and much quieter there on the walls, the rest of the gathering just a low roar far beneath them. Imoen sent him a pleased grin, sparing not a thought for her gown as she jumped up to sit on the lower crenelle and patted the stone next to her, the sheer drop on the other side seemingly outside her concern.
There, this is a bit better, isn't it?
She sighed as he sank down at her side, Imoen taking a good sip of wine, an eager hand already pressing at his arm.
Now, I want all the gossip. You can tell me who Anomen's new bird is for a start. You speak of Brianna.
Valigar confirmed.
There is little to tell. She was traveling to Athkatla with hopes of joining the order. We met her on the road back from trade meet and she traveled the remaining leagues to the city with us. I assume by her presence here, she and Anomen have become better acquainted since.
Clearly, Imoen sniped, her disapproval evident.
Fritha is loads prettier.
Valigar remained decidedly neutral.
Well, if the sages have it true, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Beholder is right, she was all teeth and eye stalks.
He snorted into his cup, Imoen still lost to giggling next to him as he began his reproach.
And why should you be concerned about Anomen's choice of lady? I did not believe you approved of him.
The girl shook her head, swallowing another mouthful.
I don't much, but then Fritha went to all that effort to bring him back to life and I figured she must like him well enough. Perhaps, though she seemed to favor company of another sort when we were back in Suldanesseller,
Valigar offered, wondering when he had begun to even take note of such things. Imoen was frowning.
What? Who? Well, the drow was one of the few people she would speak to before we left. What, Fritha and Cellophane?
Imoen considered aloud, before quickly dismissing it with a shake of her head.
Nah, Fritha couldn't keep a secret like that from me. So what about you?
She continued with a careful nonchalance.
Had the ladies of Athkatla cried the city a second river in your absence? But seriously, are there any new girls on the horizon or are you just sticking with the usual dozen?
Valigar quirked a smile.
My habits are so far unchanged. But what of you? Do the young men of Suldanesseller strew the streets now, broken-hearted?
She shrugged airily, a sly smile pulling at her mouth.
Probably, but I made them no promises.
Valigar laughed, the girl's cheek could always raise a smile from him, Imoen giggling as well.
You know I was talking to Fritha just before we left Suldanesseller and we might be coming back to Athkatla soon enough, we still good to stay at yours? Ah, yes, if you wish it,
he faltered, recalling the offer he had made what felt like an age ago.
There is more than enough room. Poor Vals,
she sighed teasingly,
you'll be lonely once Minsk has gone.
Valigar made a movement somewhere between a shrug and a nod.
I am used to the solitude and Minsk would have left long ago had he been traveling southward. The caravans cannot seem to hire enough guards. Why? Have you not heard? I thought with you coming from nearer the border.
He trailed off, Imoen giving a wry snort.
Perhaps you didn't notice it when you were there, but Sultanaseller's a bit isolated. Well, the rumors have a band of giants roaming Tethur, though to what end no one can yet say. The last report I heard had them sighted in the Starspire Mountains.
Imoen's pale face hid nothing of her rising dismay.
The Starspires? They border the Wealdeth, that's right next to Sultanaseller. Imoen, the Starspires are a 10-day from the city, and whatever these giants' plans, I do not believe the elves are their target.
But it was as though these truths meant nothing to the girl, her knuckles white about her cup as she stared out across the courtyard.
I need to speak to Jahara. But I need to speak to Jahara now.
She snapped, a surge of blue sparks dancing between her fingers. Valigar scowled, on his feet in an instant and thrusting his cup at her.
Fine. Wait here.
Imoen's face fell, the girl hastening to catch his arm.
Vals, I'm really sorry,
But he had already gone. End of chapter.